Here's something that should unsettle you. An entire generation was systematically taught that effort equals outcome, that education guarantees security, and that following the rules leads to success. Then, when they did everything right, the system changed the rules mid-game and told them it was their fault for not adapting faster. That's not just economic hardship. That's a mass psychological experiment in learned helplessness conducted on 72 million people. I'm talking about millennials, born between 1981 and 1996. And the data on what happened to their collective mental health reads like a case study in societal gaslighting. Today, we're dissecting the psychology of the first generation explicitly expected to be worse off than their parents, and what that expectation alone does to the human brain. Let's start with something that doesn't make intuitive sense. Psychologist Jean Twenge literally wrote the book on this, Generation Me, documenting that millennials score higher on narcissism scales than previous generations. But here's where it gets psychologically fascinating. They simultaneously score higher on anxiety and depression than any generation before them. You've got a cohort that thinks they're special while feeling completely worthless at the same time. According to the American Psychological Association, 12% of millennials have been diagnosed with clinical anxiety disorder, more than double the rate for baby boomers at 5%. Yet 56% report having excellent or very good mental health, compared to 70% of boomers and 74% of older adults. This creates what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, holding two contradictory beliefs simultaneously. But it's not random. It's the predictable outcome of a specific child-rearing experiment. Millennials were raised during the peak of the self-esteem movement. Everyone gets a trophy. You're special just for existing. Your feelings matter more than outcomes. These weren't malicious ideas. They came from earnest psychological research in the 1980s suggesting that boosting children's self-esteem would improve performance. The problem? That research turned out to be backwards. High self-esteem doesn't cause success. Success causes self-esteem. When you tell kids they're amazing without requiring achievement, you create a generation with inflated self-perception but no actual foundation to support it. Then those kids became adults and discovered that the real world doesn't care about participation trophies. Employers don't praise you for showing up. Landlords don't reduce rent because you believe you deserve it. Reality delivered a massive correction to an entire generation's self-concept simultaneously. Research from Berkeley's Patrice Center analyzing National College Health Assessment data from 727,162 student responses found that anxiety diagnoses among 18 to 20-year-olds increased 66% between 2008 and 2015, with the steepest increases among millennials. The result? A generation that simultaneously believes they deserve better while feeling perpetually inadequate. Narcissism with a side of crippling self-doubt. It's not a character flaw, it's a trauma response with a LinkedIn profile. Now let's talk about what happened when millennials tried to apply their participation trophy worldview to an economy that fundamentally changed during their formative years. The oldest millennials graduated college in 2003. The youngest graduated in 2018. Between those years, the entire structure of American work transformed. Pensions disappeared entirely. Full-time positions with benefits became contract work. Unions collapsed. The gig economy emerged. Job security became an anachronism. Mass layoffs shifted from corporate emergencies to routine efficiency measures. Student loan debt increased 230% between 2006 and 2020. Meanwhile, median personal income for young adults remained essentially flat when adjusted for inflation. College tuition and fees increased 40% between 2001 and 2023, from $22,118 to $30,884, while median income rose just 2% in real terms. Think about the psychological impact of that timing. You're told your whole childhood, go to college, it's an investment in your future. So you take out loans that seemed manageable based on the earning potential of previous generations. Then you graduate into the Great Recession where entry-level jobs require 5 years of experience, pay $35,000, and offer no benefits. And you're carrying $25,000 to $30,000 in student debt, the median for millennials ages 35 to 44. The the psychological term for when reality fundamentally violates your core beliefs about how the world works is schema disruption. When your operating assumptions about cause and effect turn out to be wrong, your brain has to completely rebuild its model of reality. Research published in the Journal of Financial Counseling and Planning found that student loan debt is negatively associated with life satisfaction and psychological well-being even after controlling for other types of debt. It's uniquely damaging because it's non-dischargeable and delays family formation and homeownership. But here's what makes this particularly insidious. Millennials didn't fail to follow the rules. They followed the rules perfectly. The rules just stopped working. Gen X saw corporate layoffs and became skeptical of institutions. But millennials were told that Gen X's cynicism was the problem, that if you just worked harder, got more education, hustled more, you'd succeed. So they did. Millennials are the most educated generation in history. They work longer hours than previous generations. They're more productive, and they're drowning. The psychological term for this is learned helplessness. When organisms learn that their actions don't influence outcomes, they stop trying. Except millennials can't stop trying because the alternative is homelessness. So instead, they develop what researchers call all-astatic load, chronic activation of stress response systems preparing for disasters that never quite arrive but never quite go away either. Your body running Windows Update for 15 years straight. The progress bar hasn't moved, but you can't restart because you might lose everything. Now layer in social media, which millennials adopted during the precise developmental window when identity formation occurs, late teens and early 20s. Facebook launched in 2004, Instagram in 2010, Twitter in 2006. Millennials learned how to be adults while simultaneously learning how to perform their lives for an audience. According to Pew Research, 86% of millennials use social media platforms, higher than any other generation. And research from multiple studies links social media use to increased depression, anxiety, and what psychologists call social comparison distress. Dr. Tim Kaiser's research on materialism and well-being demonstrates that when people base their self-worth on external validation, which is precisely what social media platforms are designed to encourage, their mental health deteriorates measurably. You're essentially running a 24/7 political campaign for your own existence, and the polls never close. Every post is a test. Every lack of engagement is a referendum on your value. And the algorithm is specifically tuned to maximize the psychological discomfort that keeps you checking your phone. But here's what's particularly damaging for millennials specifically. They're using social media to present the successful adult life they were promised but cannot actually afford. You post pictures from the vacation you put on a credit card. You share the apartment that costs 50% of your income. You curate an image of thriving while privately drowning. And then you scroll through everyone else doing the same thing and feel like you're the only one failing. This creates a vicious cycle. The more you perform success you don't have, the more anxious you become about maintaining the performance. The more anxious you become, the more you seek validation through social media. The more you seek validation, the worse your mental health gets. A systematic review published in JMIR Mental Health Analyzing Studies of Social Networking Sites found significant associations between social media use and both depression and anxiety, with effects mediated by comparison, FOMO, fear of missing out, and validation-seeking behaviors. And millennials can't opt out because social media is now how you network, find jobs, maintain friendships, and signal professional credibility. It's mandatory performance anxiety. All of this creates what psychologists are now calling emerging adulthood, a developmental stage that didn't exist before millennials. Traditional markers of adulthood, marriage, homeownership, children, financial independence, are happening 5 to 10 years later for millennials than for previous generations. Or not happening at all. According to Bloomberg, 45% of young adults ages 18 to 29 live at home with their families, a rate not seen since the Great Depression. 1/3 of millennials plan to move back home in the near future, compared to 23% of their parents' generation. But here's the crucial psychological distinction. This isn't because millennials don't want those things. Surveys consistently show they do want marriage, homes, and children, often at higher rates than Gen X. They just can't afford them. When achieving the markers of what society defines as adulthood becomes unattainable, your brain doesn't just shrug and move on. You experience what developmental psychologists call role confusion. You're the right age to be an adult, but you don't have access to adult milestones, so you exist in psychological limbo. Jeffrey Arnett, a psychology professor at Clark University who pioneered research on emerging adulthood, found that many millennials feel aimless, even after finishing education and securing employment. They keep putting off major life decisions not because they're lazy or immature, but because they genuinely don't feel ready, and the objective economic data validates that feeling. Research shows that median rents increased over 20% in the past 20 years, while median income rose just 2%. For millennials specifically, 80% are renters rather than homeowners. Housing costs alone consume 30 to 50% of income for most millennials, making traditional wealth accumulation mathematically impossible. This creates profound identity distress. You're 35 years old, working full-time, and your life doesn't look anything like what 35 was supposed to look like. You feel like you're perpetually waiting for your real life to start. Except the waiting room is a studio apartment costing $2,200 a month and your therapist is booked until March. And then, because the universe has a sense of humor, millennials get to experience multiple overlapping existential crises simultaneously. They graduated into the Great Recession, 2008. They hit their career stride during COVID, 2020. They're entering peak earning years during climate catastrophe. They're watching school shootings become routine while sending their own children to schools that now have active shooter drills. Since Columbine in 1999, school shootings have increased every year. Millennials are the first generation to both grow up with this threat and now send their children to school under the same conditions. On top of economic precarity, they're dealing with what psychologists now call climate anxiety, a legitimate psychological phenomenon characterized by chronic fear about environmental collapse. And unlike previous generations who could at least pretend these were distant problems, millennials have front-row seats to every crisis in real time via their phones. They're watching glaciers melt on Instagram. They're seeing species go extinct on Twitter. They're experiencing apocalypse as content. Mental Health America reports that millennials are 6 to 7 times more likely to be unemployed if they have severe mental health conditions, and 2 to 3 times more likely with mild to moderate conditions. In California, from 2011 to 2015, the number of young adults unable to work 1 or more days due to mental problems increased by nearly 10 percentage points. This creates what trauma researchers call complex PTSD, not a single traumatic event, but ongoing, chronic exposure to stressors that your nervous system never gets to fully recover from. But here's what millennials got right. They destigmatized therapy and mental health care in ways previous generations never did. According to the APA's 2018 survey, 35% of millennials said they'd received help from a mental health professional, significantly higher than previous generations at the same age. Millennials talk openly about anxiety and depression. They discuss medication without shame. They view mental health care as basic maintenance, not moral failure. They've normalized the language of trauma, boundaries, and emotional regulation. This is genuinely revolutionary. Previous generations suffered in silence or medicated with alcohol. Millennials created a culture where, "I'm seeing my therapist," is a normal sentence instead of a shameful secret. The problem is they're doing this while living in conditions that are objectively more stressful than previous generations faced. They've normalized talking about mental health while dealing with economic conditions that guarantee mental health crises. It's like they've invented better firefighting techniques while someone keeps pouring gasoline on everything. So what does all this mean? The psychology of millennials isn't a mystery. They're responding exactly how humans respond when promises get broken systematically, when rules change mid-game, when effort stops predicting outcomes, and when the map you were given no longer matches the territory. They simultaneously believe they deserve better because they were told their entire childhood that they did, while feeling completely powerless to get it because the economic data proves they can't. They're anxious achievers, depressed optimists, educated underemployed, networked isolated. They're not broken. The system they inherited is broken, and their psychology is a perfectly rational response to an irrational situation. If this resonated with you, subscribe to the channel. And if you want to support more research-driven psychology content, consider becoming a channel member. Thanks for watching.